Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be giving you my first impressions as well as a flip through of the soon-to-be released Van Richtens Guide to Ravenloft. So this is the latest book for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons put out by Wizards of the Coast. It officially releases on May 18th. I'm recording this on May 7th, I believe is the date today. So this is a campaign setting book that is based off of the Ravenloft campaign setting that we've had from 2nd edition AD&D on, which was spawned by the Ravenloft adventure from way back in the days of 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. The Ravenloft campaign setting is one where you don't have a set plane like we do with Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk, Eberron, Dragonlance, stuff like that. With Ravenloft, they are comprised of what they're called domains of dread. These are basically like little demi-planes that are self-contained and they're not necessarily related to one another. And they sort of serve as prisons for some of the most depraved and irredeemably evil souls throughout the different multiverses and planes of existence in the Dungeons and Dragons world. At different points in time, you had Count Strahd, obviously the most famous prisoner, I guess you could say, of the Ravenloft setting. You also had Vecna, before he ascended to godhood, and you also had, for a period of time, you had Lord Soth, the Death Knight from Dragonlance. Were all sort of caught in their own domains of dread. So this gives you a whole bunch of new domains that you can use, as well as their overlords, and some other advice for running games that use the horror genre. Because in addition to being a campaign setting, it's also sort of a genre setting book, and it gives you a lot of different advice for running different types of horror games, which we're going to sort of show as we go on here. So, as it says, unleash the horrors of Ravenloft in this campaign source book. It's for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. The U.S. retail price for this is $49.95. $65.95 Canadian. And as I said, Wizards of the Coast did send this to me for review purposes. So I do want to thank them very much for that. They're not controlling the review. They're not dictating what's said in it. They're not scripting it or pre-screening or anything like that. So the opinions that I express in these videos, as always, are 100% completely and totally my own. So yeah, this was a book that I was really excited about. Ravenloft is one of my favorite campaign settings. One of my holy grails, one of my first holy grails back in the day was getting a Ravenloft campaign setting box set for 2nd edition AD&D, and I did manage to find one. It's in terrible shape, but it was one of the first major finds for my collection. So on the inside, we have our credits, including quite a few different writers that are attributed to this book as well. So it sort of reminds me a lot of the Candlekeep Mysteries book, which had different authors for each of the different scenarios, and it feels like there's different authors for many of the different demi-planes that are introduced here, or domains, whatever you want to call them. And I do like that approach. It gives, first of all, it gives more people opportunities to get their names printed in these books and become credited, but it also gives you a more wider range of interests or genre types that they're wanting to write for or write about. So you get sort of a more diverse series of entries versus just having a single or just a couple of writers that have a very similar style all the way throughout. So I do like that approach to it. And we also see the covers, so the regular cover here, as well as the alternate cover. I'll give you a closer look at that alternate cover towards the end of the video. We have our table of contents here as well. So we have an introduction, character creation, chapter 1. So that goes over some different things like lineages that you can apply to your current race, or you can even substitute it out for your race altogether if you wish. There's dark gifts, which I haven't read too much yet, but it is a concept that I'm very interested in, and I'll talk more about those when I do the proper review. Like I said, this is an early impressions video. I've had this for just a few hours, and I haven't had a lot of opportunities to read through it, but what I have read through so far, I will say, I guess spoilers, I am very impressed with. There's some subclass options, so we get the Bard, College of Spirits, as well as the Warlock with the Undead Patron, and then we get some different backgrounds. Creating domains of dread, so there are some guidelines that you can use when creating your own domain. So if you wanted to sort of design your own locations instead of using the ones provided in the book, There are guidelines for that, as well as some information and, again, guidelines for running various different types of like horror genres. So instead of it just being like sort of like the gothic horror that, the original Ravenloft adventure Curse of Strahd is based off of, this gives you all kinds of different things to draw from. You have like body horror, cosmic horror, dark fantasy, folk horror, ghost stories, gothic horror, and there's a few other ones that it gets into as well. Chapter 3 is all about the domains of Ravenloft. Again, they're not connected necessarily. They're loosely through the mists, but they are sort of their own self-contained regions, and you get quite a few of them to go through here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So like I think there's 17 really developed or fleshed out ones, and then we've got a few others as well, and there's one that I really was not expecting to see in here, so we'll get to that as well. Then we have advice for running horror adventures, things to keep in mind when doing that. And then we've got our new monsters and creatures. So like I said, we're just going to sort of flip through things here, try to go through as much of the book as possible. I do love the artwork. I will say right off the bat, really enjoying the artwork in this book. I think there's just some awesome stuff in here. Character creation. So starting with this, we have our haunted heroes. So this is where we get our lineages. So with the lineage, you can either have them be something that you develop later on after your character's been sort of like developed for a while now. They could be like latent things that get awoken, or you can create them as that lineage from the very beginning. So for example, if you are someone who has those abilities awoken or awakened later on, then you basically get to keep essentially all of the stat attributes as well as your proficiencies and movement types, but your other racial features typically get replaced with some other ones. Or if you start off with your character being from that lineage completely, then you get some other things that you can customize. So for example, ability scores, if you start at first level or a character creation as this lineage, there's like Damphir, Hexblooded, and Reborn, I think, or I forget exactly the name of this third one. We'll get to there in a second. But basically, instead of using the starting race's attributes increases, you can put a +2 into any one attribute and then +1 into another, or you can put +1 into 3 different attributes, depending on how you want to sort of go about doing that. And then with your skill proficiencies, if you start at first level, you can either take the ones that you wanted, or that the class gave you, or the race gave you, or you could choose a different number of skill proficiencies based on each of the different lineages. So the first one we have, like I said, is the Damphir. That is the half humanoid, half vampire sort of hybrid creature. If you think of like the Castlevania games, Alucard was a Damphir, for example, because he had a human mother and Dracula was his father. So we got them. So this is again really cool. Love the Damphirs, and it's really nice seeing them in the current fantasy RPGs. We also have the Hexblood. So these are hag-blooded individuals. So at some point there in their lineage or in their ancestry or history, their family tree, there was some hag blood involved somewhere, which sort of trickles down to the player character. Then we have the Reborn. Reborn was the name. I think I said that the first time. And they're basically individuals who have died, but not quite. So it says here for these ones, because these are sort of the most different of the ones that came before. So it says, death isn't always the end. The Reborn exemplify this, being individuals who have died yet somehow still live. Some Reborn exhibit scars of fatal ends, their ashen flesh or bloodless veins making it clear that they've been touched by death. Other Reborn are marvels of magic or science, being stitched together from disparate beings or bearing mysterious minds in manufactured bodies. Whatever their origins, Reborn know a new life and seek experiences and answers all on their own. So they get some interesting abilities. They have a deathless nature, so they have advantage on saving throws versus disease and poisoned. They don't have advantage on death saving throws. They don't need to eat, sleep, or breathe, or eat, drink, and breathe. They don't need to sleep, but magic can put you to sleep. You can finish a 4-hour-long rest, similar to sort of like an elf's meditation, I guess you could say. They get knowledge from past life, so you can temporarily tap into your previous existence to gain a bonus on certain skill checks and stuff like that. So again, really, really cool stuff. The Dark Gifts, like I said, I haven't actually read this section too much. So I don't have much to say about it yet. That will be included in the final review. I have used stuff like this in the past, however, in other systems and other things. So, for example, I had in a Call of Cthulhu game, I had an entity offer gifts to one of the player characters. All they had to do was accept it, and they didn't. Actually, I did the same thing in Rime of the Frost Maiden as well. So there's been different things that have sort of used that sort of concept, but I haven't read how they're handled here yet. So, like I said, that's something that I'll save for the full review. But it is, again, another cool concept, I think, to have in these books. And then we get our subclasses. So the first one that we have is the Bard College of Spirits. So the College of Spirits seek tales with inherent power, be they legends, histories, or fictions, and bring their subjects to life. Using occult trappings, these bards conjure spiritual embodiments of power, forces to change the world once more. Such spirits are capricious, though, and what a bard summons isn't always entirely under their control. So yeah, they get some interesting concepts here. Again, I'll touch more on them, I think, in the full review, because this, it's an interesting option. But I was more interested in the warlock option with the undead patron, because these things get really, really cool. So it gives like spell list, which is normal, but you get Form of Dread as a first level ability. So you manifest an aspect of your patron's dreadful power. As a bonus action, you transform for 1 minute and you gain the following benefits while transformed. So you gain temporary hit points equal to 1d10 plus your level, so 1d10 plus 1 at first level. Once during each of your turns, when you hit a creature with an attack roll, you can force it to make a wisdom saving throw. If the saving throw fails, the target is frightened of you until the end of your next turn, and you are immune to the frightened condition. You also have different abilities that allow you to turn your attacks, like your weapon attacks, or damaging attacks that you inflict on individuals. You can turn it into necrotic damage instead of like slashing, piercing, bludgeoning, or what have you. Necrotic Husk is an interesting one. So it says your connection to undeath and necrotic energy now saturates your body. You have resistance to necrotic damage. However, if you transformed using your Form of Dread, you're actually immune to it. In addition, when you would be reduced to 0 hit points, you can use your reaction to drop to 1 hit point instead, and cause your body to erupt with deathly energy. Each creature of your choice that is within 30 feet of you takes necrotic damage equal to 2d10 plus your warlock level. You then gain 1 level of exhaustion. What's interesting about this, seems like a pretty powerful ability. However, once you use this reaction, you can't do so again until you finish 1d4 long rests. As far as I know, this is the first ability in 5th edition D&D that may require multiple long rests before you actually get it back. So it's interesting to see that sort of, them sort of explore that concept or that idea that it may take multiple days. Instead of it being like, you have to rest for a week or 10 days or whatever, it is a bit more variable, but it is interesting to see some particularly powerful abilities. 2d10 plus your level, so minimum of 2d10 plus 10 by the time you gain it's not bad, to everything within 30 feet. And it doesn't look like there's a saving throw involved. It just says they take that much energy, or that much damage. So it's a powerful ability, but it takes longer to recharge. As a DM, I would require that the player roll that out in the open. Or if we're doing like online games, I might make the roll for him, just so I know like it's not going to be like always one day, for example. But it's still really cool that they've started that. And then you've got spirit projection, which you can do as well. And then we get some different backgrounds, which most of these books always have different types of backgrounds. They're interesting to read through. I haven't focused too much on them as of yet. Again, I might talk about that more in the full review. I just wanted to focus mainly on the bread and butter, or the meat and potatoes of this book, depending on what your preference is. Horde trinkets as well, I also really like. 100 different trinkets. The trinkets section was really cool and underutilized in the player's handbook. but I love the horror ones as well because they are definitely a little bit more twisted, and they're just a beautiful thing to behold. Chapter 2 is all about creating your own domains of dread. It gives you a lot of different things to consider when doing that, such as creating your Dark Lord, who they were before they became this basically unredeemable evil force. Sort of what led them to that, and things along those lines. Developing them, different things to keep in mind, as well as creating the domain itself and things to keep in mind, like the domain should be some sort of twisted reflection of its Dark Lord, things along those lines. It gives you, again, very decent amount of information, but my favorite section of this chapter has to be the different genres of horror. So this, like I said, it goes into several different types. It could have focused just specifically on like the gothic or dark fantasy horror that, things like Curse of Strahd and other such, fantasy RPGs have sort of dwelled on or used in the past. Like in 3.5, I think the Heroes of Horror book was largely dedicated to that type of horror. But this one gives you all kinds of different ones. So we have body horror. So, automatically I think of things like, Alien, like, like The Thing, Stephen Carpenter's, or John Carpenter's, not Stephen Carpenter's. It's late. John Carpenter's The Thing. Just stuff like that. So it gives you some different things to build campaigns or adventures around that kind of horror. So it gives you some villains, some torments, different settings, and different plots that you can use. So again, really, really cool. Different adventure sites, like a derelict ship buried for mysterious reasons, an asylum abandoned, save for vermin. Again, just really, really cool stuff. Gives you a lot of useful information when it comes to running the different genres that they give here. And then we have cosmic horror. So you can think of things like Lovecraft, for example, stuff like that. Again, all the same different things to consider, the different sort of major points and things that sort of set that type of horror apart from the others. Dark fantasy. So this is kind of like, I guess I think of things like Dragon Age when you think of dark fantasy. It's one of those situations where, it's not necessarily as black and white as good and evil. Sometimes good people have to do terrible things for a good cause, or horrible people can do, great things for a terrible cause. Just, sort of stuff like that. It's probably the one that I think fits, I don't want to say best, because that's definitely not true. But I think it's the one that's probably the easiest to think of when you think of something like a D&D horror type of adventure. But again, you got lots of great information there for that. Folk horror, so think of stuff like The Witcher, or like Vossen is another RPG that uses sort of like folk tales as sort of the basis for a horror campaign. Yeah, awesome stuff here. Ghost stories, that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I have to provide too many examples of that, but you're dealing with like hauntings, poltergeists, stuff like that. Again, really, really cool stuff. And then we got our gothic horror. So gothic horror, it says Gothic horror is about the terror within, not without. It shatters the illusion of humanity in a poignant way by holding up a mirror to us and saying, look at what you truly are. So yeah, again, just awesome stuff. Gives you a lot of things to sort of, again, keep in mind, all the same different things. And then we have some other genres that it touches on, not quite in as much detail or without the charts or some of that information, but still gives you a lot of great advice. So we have disaster horror. Think like zombie apocalypse, or things along those lines. Occult detective stories, so again, some Lovecraftian type of stuff there. Psychological horror, slasher horror. So if you just want to straight up run like a Jason Voorhees type of adventure, then there's some stuff to consider there as well. Chapter 3, by the way, look at that. I just love that art. Chapter 3 is all about the different domains of Ravenloft. I shouldn't say all. It's about, several different versions of them. It gives you quite a few different ones to sort of consider. One of the things that is important with this book is that the Dark Lords, so it says here basically that the Dark Lords of each domain takes their stat block from the Monster Manual or Chapter 5 of this book. So they're either just taken straight from the Monster Manual or from this one here. Now, they're meant to be sort of a baseline that you can alter in any way that you wish. The basic concept is that, Dark Lords don't necessarily have to be the most, like, physically powerful, or not the most physically powerful creature in that domain, but they are the most imposing, either through their command of the denizens of that domain or the abilities that they can command. So it's something where they're not necessarily going to be like, a CR20 creature every single time. You don't have to be an epic level threat to be sort of a depraved, evil, irredeemable creature. And again, Dark Lords typically, even if they're slain, simply reconstitute after a period of time. So it's not like killing them is necessarily going to be their end, that sort of thing. So it's just stuff like that to keep in mind. And I'll talk a little bit more about that sort of as we get to the end part of this video. It does start off with Barovia. So this is from the Curse of Strahd, or the typical Ravenloft adventures. It does give you some decent information on some of the different locations, as well as some of the notable NPCs like Strahd von Zarovich, and some different adventure ideas. So you can use the Barovia setting for things other than just the Curse of Strahd. The characters may be hired by the priest of a religious order to recover the bones from a dead priest or holy figure that's buried in the crypt underneath the castle. There's all kinds of different things that you can do beyond just the adventure, but it does point you towards Curse of Strahd if you wanted to run the main, or sort of the default version of it. Again, it gives you some charts you can use to design your own adventures around. So again, really, really cool stuff. But then we get into the newer and unique ones. The first one of which is actually very unique. So we have Blutspur. So this is a demiplane that is not like any of the other demiplanes in this book. This is a cosmic horror. So here we have the Dark Lord. It tells you who they are. So it's the God Brain, or basically like a mind flare, like Overmind, or like the just basically the giant brain thing, the big giant brain. It gives you the genre. So this is a cosmic horror setting. The different hallmarks of the adventure. So there's like alien abductions, otherworldly landscapes, untrustworthy memories, monstrous experimentation, and then the mist talismans. So things, the mist talismans are like relics or magic items that I think you can use to I want to say travel the planes. I actually haven't really read what they do yet, because I was more focused on going through for these settings. But again, I'll touch on that when we get to the review, and I'll read through and do it on camera here when we get to that part of it. But yeah, so we got some different adventure sites, but it gives you just some features and some different things, adventures that you can run there. Lots of different things to sort of go off of. Suppressed memories, so the characters may have been there before, and something happened that they've repressed, and they have to try to recover those memories. And I do like the Adventures at a Time section, because it does talk about the idea of letting the players revisit those memories or replay through those events by playing like lower level versions of themselves, or as like different characters altogether, and going through it. I actually had made a video a few years ago now about that kind of concept for things like history checks or investigation checks, if you're like researching a subject and you're trying to get like the information on it, and actually using that to let the players play as different characters and go through the events. So it sort of touches on that, which I thought was something that was really, really cool. So the next one we have is Borca, the Domain of Desire and Deceit. Again, I'm not going to go through every single one here, but like, so they give you the same sort of template. It tells you who the Dark Lords are, gives you the genres. So this is a gothic horror and psychological horror one. So the different features. This one does have a map, because the other domain is sort of how do you say it? It's sort of like nebulous in its geography. So it's always going to be different. Like, things are constantly changing. It's not reliable, to say the least. But this one here, you do have sort of set geography, and the different individuals here. So we've got the Dark Lord of Ivana, and she is just very like ambitious, and does not hesitate to resort to horrific murder to try to get her way. And then she has her cousin, Ivan, who is sort of more about like just amusing himself, and seeking out, different pleasures and things like that. And again, very interesting creatures. I mean, the artwork again is very disturbing, especially for him. Then we get your adventures chart, so different things that you can do to pull the players into this particular demi-plane. Different noble groups or nobles that they can talk about or talk to, different things they can sort of go through. So again, it gives you quite a bit of information on what to do in this particular domain. We have the Carnival, which is a body horror and dark fantasy one. What's interesting about this particular domain is that it can actually intersect with the prime material planes. So you can just sort of have this traveling carnival of just bizarre and sort of macabre stuff happening on any plane of existence without the players actually having to necessarily cross over into like the mists of Ravenloft, so to speak. So again, another really, really cool one. So again, there's all kinds of them in this book, and they're all interesting. I'm looking forward to reading through them all in greater detail. But again, I love the fact that each of these also have like different genres that they go through, different sort of themes and feelings when you go to run them. So again, just a lot of really just awesome stuff. So we have like the disaster horror of I'm bad at pronouncing things. Volkovnia. So this is sort of like it's sort of a mix of like a zombie apocalypse, but you also have sort of just an overbearing like military human presence that's making life miserable as well. So there's a lot of different things going on with this one, but again, just really, really cool stuff. So there's quite a few different concepts here. You can have like sieges and like just sort of larger scale combats, different things that you can have there. So the encounters that happens during the siege, things that you come across, and different things to sort of end the siege on. So we have Harakir, which is it's sort of like an Egyptian-based one. So you have the Dark Lord as sort of this the spirit of a pharaoh. And again, just really awesome stuff. I love Egyptian culture, even though I'm not nearly as versed on it as I would like to be, but I've always loved Egyptian culture. So this is one that I definitely want to put into a campaign at some point. And like I said, there's just all kinds of different ones here. Some fantastic, again, and you get so many different concepts and ideas from having different authors sort of write these or collaborate on these, that it really shows. And like I said, you really do get sort of a diverse series of different planes that you can use. So again, just some awesome stuff here. Okay, yeah, this is probably my favorite art in this entire book, and I'm always a sucker for a brain in a jar, and this is a brain in a jar that's trying to rebuild or create a new body for itself. Just again, I love it. I just love it. So we have a more ghostly themed one here, disaster horror and gothic horror. Folk horror, so Tempest. This one uses a hag as a sort of its central antagonist or its dark lord. Gothic horror and slasher horror. So we finally got some slasher horror going on here. And then we have other domains. So those were the ones that were sort of fleshed out, but we also have several different ones that are based on, or just you get some sort of like seeds for that you can sort of develop and build into your own adventures. My favorite one is the very first one. So it's Seer 1313, the Morning Rail. This is Seer from Eberron. So this is sort of an event that spawned from the Day of Mourning. And so there's just some stuff that you can do with that. And it's just awesome. It basically revolves around a group of individuals that were trying to flee on a lightning rail, and unfortunately they didn't quite make it, and now they're sort of sucked into this demi-plane. It's just so awesome. I love it, and that's one I definitely would want to build upon, especially if I run an Eberron campaign. I think that'd be awesome to be able to run. So you get, like I said, you get quite a few. You get lots of different ones to build off of. So again, some awesome stuff. We have also some information on Travelers in the Mist, so some different organizations or peoples. Like we have the Vistani here, so we have their write-ups. So this is sort of the updated version of them. Again, it doesn't seem really, to me, doesn't feel all that different. And yeah, I mean, I think they're well developed and again, really interesting to try to incorporate into your game. Some other organizations, other individuals of note. Rudolf van Richten's in here as well. And again, I think for each of these individuals, it does give you what creature to use as a basis. So, for example, what do we got here? I just want to find one with a name that I can try to pronounce. So with the color, so it says the color has statistics similar to a succubus or incubus, but then some differences that they can, that you can incorporate into there as well. I think Rudolf van Richten, so Rudolf van Richten, you can either use, where is it here? You can either use a priest from the monster manual, or you can use Rictavio from the Curse of Strahd, because Rictavio was Rudolf van Richten. So again, it does give you sort of the baseline to sort of look at, and you can develop or build or change things however you want to fit the adventure that you want to run. Chapter 4 is about running horror campaigns and some different things to keep in mind. For example, understanding horror, preparing for horror, setting expectations, just sort of making sure that the players at your table, there may be certain things that may be off limits, or things that they're just, like horror is always about getting you out of your comfort zone, but there are situations where you may be forced a little too far out of your comfort zone. In other horror RPGs, I've sort of talked about that, and how, if you were playing those other RPGs, you really should have an idea of what to expect. But with D&D, it is a little bit different. So especially if you're running stuff at like Adventurers League, or if you're just running like an open table at your local game store or conventions and stuff like that, it's just good to sort of have an idea of what things, maybe make players a bit too uncomfortable, sort of thing. So like Dungeons and Dragons is not a horror-based role-playing game. You can have elements and you can have adventures that take advantage of, the horror genre, but by and large, you don't go into a typical D&D campaign expecting to deal with large degrees of like body horror, cosmic horror, or psychological horror, stuff like that. So, I think in this situation, it does completely make sense. Now, if you know your group, and if you already know what they're like, you already know what they're into, and if you watch like horror movie marathons all the time, then you probably don't have to worry about it. But this is sort of mainly for, if you're playing with, I would say again, with players that, maybe not your typical group, or like a new group that you're starting somewhere. It's just, it's basic common sense stuff that I think is fine. Just sort of know, what limits are, and then try not to step over them as best as possible. And it just gives you, again, some great advice for running horror games, including things like, pacing, describing the horror, the different like how to use the gameplay to set the stage. There's just a lot of really, really useful stuff in here as well. So yeah, I think this is, again, a very, very good chapter to read through. There's just going to be some great advice and stuff in here. Then we have the horror toolkit. So we have like curses, different ways that you can have curses placed on characters, or, NPCs. The characters have to be tasked with trying to find a way to break the curses. And some sample ones. So again, really, really cool stuff there. Using fear and stress, using haunted traps, for example. I like the Faceless Malice trap. It sounds really, really cool. And then creating survivors. So survivors are essentially, they're like your sidekick type of NPCs that the characters can interact with. So they give you the different ones here. So you have Apprentice, Disciple, Sneak, and Squire. So you have their base stats and how you can sort of improve them, or things that they can get as they progress in power alongside the player characters. So again, just really useful stuff to have. Then we have a full-fledged adventure called the House of Lament. I haven't read this through yet. I read through the summary a little bit, and I honestly really thought a lot of Death House when I first started reading this, which was the introductory adventure for Curse of Strahd. Now, this is not the same thing. This is sort of like a ghostly adventure, and there's hauntings, and you have to conduct seances and stuff like that. But it's not quite the same as Death House. It's just, there were certain things that felt like inspired by, I guess you could say. But it seems like a very interesting concept. I just haven't had time to read through the adventure in full. But yeah, it seems like a really good ghost story though. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see um, how it actually turns out when I get the chance to read it and all. So I'll mention that in the review video, or I may even review the adventure separately just in case people want to avoid spoilers. Then we get into our monsters of Ravenloft. So we just have a whole bunch of new different creatures here and some concepts and stuff that you can sort of work off of, like creating unique nightmares. So this one here is the Bagman, and that looks super awesome. But it's a creature that emerges from a bag of holding. So again, just some really cool concepts here. And then we have the bestiary. Again, with some really cool creatures. You got your brain in a jar, so you gotta have a brain in a jar. You got the carionette instead of a marionette. So again, just some really interesting stuff here. You have Death's Head and the Dualahan, or however you pronounce that. So basically, like your headless horseman type of enemy. Gallows speakers. Again, there's just some cool, just some really cool concepts in here. I'm like I said, I just love it. I honestly love it to death. So I guess that may be some spoilers when it comes to the actual review. We got Nosferatu in here as well. And we have Necro-Iker, which is Necro-Iker is a being of living blood formed from the ichor of evil gods, or the sludge in the crypts of failed liches. My God, that's pretty awesome. The priests of Osibus. Then we have a relentless killer, so you can use these monsters for if you wanted to run like a slasher type of one. You want to have like sort of a relentless like Jason Voorhees type character. Then you can sort of use these guys as a baseline for that. And then probably my favorite monsters in this, we have the the Star Spawn emissaries. Again, very Lovecraftian, very awesome. You got some swarms of maggots and scarabs. Inquisitors. And then the unspeakable horrors. The vampiric mind flare. I love that art. Some of the artwork, I will say, especially some of the more like twisted and just kind of like really unnerving stuff, honestly reminds me a little bit of the 3.0 Book of Vile Darkness book. I don't know why I said Book of Vile Darkness book. It has literally the word book in its title, but that supplement from 3.0 had a lot of like disturbing kind of artwork and just like the twisted style, like just the twisted and unnatural stance of like the vampiric mind flare. Just so cool. And I mean, I love mind flares, some of my favorite creatures. So this guy is going to get some use in a game of mine. Fair warning to my players. And then we have zombies. So you have the swarm of zombie limbs. That's just like, oh, that's just so cool. And then the zombie plague spreader, which is one that's referenced in the zombie apocalypse domain of dread that we talked about earlier. The name of sort of which escapes me. And then you have the spirit board, which if you wanted to use for seances and stuff like that, you can photocopy it. And the thing that goes over it, I'm not super well versed in that. But anyway, so that is Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. So that was the flip through. Initially, I am really impressed with this book. So, I mean, I'm a huge fan of horror to begin with. So my favorite movies, like almost all of my favorite movies are from the horror genre. With a couple of exceptions, some of my favorite non D&D role-playing games are also based around different types of horror. So I'm a huge fan of horror, and it's really cool to see it brought into the current edition. And this is honestly a really good resource for running horror-based campaigns. I was really impressed with the fact that they decided to focus on several different genres, including ones that I wouldn't necessarily expect to see in a D&D product, like particularly stuff like the body horror. It's something I wasn't quite expecting them to touch on. But you got all kinds of different genres that you can run. The domains that they have in here are very interesting. I think they're very well written. They have some very interesting, like overlord, what's the name? Like they're dreadlords, or basically the people that are sort of imprisoned, like your Strahds and other such individuals. And I think that they're really well done. At first, I was sort of disappointed that we didn't have the domains that once housed Vecna or Lord Soth, but at the same time, that was sort of a temporary thing, and the more I thought about it, the more I kind of appreciated the fact that the material that they have, the different domains of dread that they include in this book, all seem to be like brand new, and something that has been developed specifically for this book instead of completely retreading stuff from the past, which I know some people tend to have issues with when it comes to 5th edition D&D. So they use the Ravenloft name and setting as sort of the backdrop, but the locations that they have in here are unique, they're new, there's different like author styles and different takes on things. Just overall makes for a very interesting read. There's, again, some great characters, there's some great NPCs, some tragic villains or NPCs. There's all kinds of just awesome stuff included in this book. I will say another thing at first I was kind of upset with was the fact that they didn't have specific stat blocks for the different dread lords, the different, the dark lords that reside over these locations. But at the same time, I've kind of, as I was reading through it, I actually started to appreciate the fact that they didn't rely on that. And instead, they did get more use out of stat blocks from the monster manual, or the few ones that are unique to this book are fine as well. But what they do is they give you sort of a baseline, and then you can customize and change that to suit whatever level you want to run that particular domain for. So you don't necessarily have just like the one set stat block where, that's their abilities and, this domain is for characters of levels, blah, blah, blah. Like none of the domains actually have a level range printed in them, at least none that I could see. So if they're in there, I just missed it. And if I did, I will definitely let you know that. But I like the fact that they are more customizable that way. As someone who's an experienced dungeon master, I don't have any personal problems modifying or changing NPCs or monster stats. It is something that may be a little bit daunting for beginners if you're sort of new to running D&D, but there are resources like information in the Dungeon Master's Guide that gives you some pretty good advice about sort of customizing things. So those are definitely worth a good read. Or you can just look at the stat blocks of the domain lords that they give you here and just use that as the baseline to design the adventure around for the players being a level or two beneath the challenge rating of that particular overlord. So again, I really like the way that they approached it overall. I think that they did a really good job of allowing you to use or utilizing older resources and sort of breathing new life into them. Because with stuff like this, it's always super easy and super tempting to make everything brand new. But to go back and say this person uses the spy stat from the NPC in the player or in the monster manual, or like the priest or the archmage or stuff like that. I actually really kind of like that approach. And again, once you get more comfortable with designing your own stuff, then modifying and sort of changing them or building onto them will be a lot easier to do. And they give you all kinds of great advice. They give you all kinds of great plot hooks to get you into the individual domains. Overall, it is a very, very solid book. I would go so far as to say that of the campaign setting books that have come out, this is, if not my favorite, it's second. Like it's sort of a toss up right now between the Eberron campaign setting and this one. But man, there's a lot of different stuff that you can do with this book. And again, the different focuses on different genres of horror. It's just really, really well done. And it went above and beyond what I was really expecting. So I have to give Wizards of the Coast credit. And again, not having level ranges defined in here, I think opens it up a lot more so that, you can sort of experiment or, really put your own twist or your own your own personal touches into each of the adventures, which is something that I do like to encourage from time to time. So there you go. So this is the Van Richtens Guide to Ravenloft. It does release on May 18th. So if you're watching this before then, it's coming out soon. If you're watching this after that date, then it's already out. There are two different versions of this book that you can pick up. This is the standard cover that you can pick up at any major bookstore or hobby store, game store. However, game stores in particular can also get this game store exclusive cover here of Van Richtens Guide to Ravenloft. And I want to say is that Esmeralda? Anyway, it's one of the NPCs from Curse of Strahd. I mean, she's shown here as well. But yeah, so it kind of puts her at the forefront. But then you've got the different, creature types in the background, like the lycanthrope, the skeleton, the zombie, the witch, the like the fiend, and of course you have Count Strahd sort of leering over everything with the crows in the background, and you've got the reds and the different colors. I think this is actually a really well done exclusive, like game store exclusive cover, I have to say. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite, but it's definitely up there. I think it's just, again, really solid job. I love the different like the raven circling the talisman. Again, just awesome stuff. So I definitely recommend this. So I am hoping to have my full review coming out in probably about around the time that this book is set to release, so around the 18th, like 17th, 18th, or 19th, I'm hoping to have the full review out. Honestly, though, I don't see my opinions changing too much, so I will say it right now. I love this book. It's one of my favorite 5th edition D&D books, and I do really recommend it. Now, that said, this is a horror-themed book, so if the different genres of horror, if you're just not interested or a fan of horror to begin with, this is going to be a bit of a hard sell, but for fans of horror, the different horror genres, man, this book is awesome. So I definitely recommend checking it out. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know in the comment section below, what is your favorite domain of dread within the Ravenloft campaign setting? What are some of your favorite villains that you'd love to see trapped in their own domain? Or what kind of domains would you make for some of your favorite villains as a form of like eternal punishment for their evil deeds? Anyway, again, thank you guys very much for watching. Thanks again, Wizards of the Coast, for sending this out for review. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. Take care.